touching on, like I gave this talk last year in Miami in November, and I was saying this like 2023 is going to be the year of economic exploits. And so far that's been true. Like we've seen a lot of governance being liquidated with the treasury, like Oracle manipulation left and right. These are the two main ones I think we've been seeing. And Ajay, I know you've been doing some research on this, so we'll definitely have to talk about that and see what that and what your take is on it. But yeah, I'm just excited because it's actually been turning out the way that I expected. And initially, when I came up with this term, it was tokenomic security, and then everyone started saying economic security. Like story of my life with tokenomics, people just changing terms. But yeah, that's I'm excited to talk about this, and I think we've made a lot of progress internally at Tokenomics toward formalizing a framework for economic security, which is going to be really great when it comes out. So anyway, Jules, how you doing?
Hey, great. Everything's fine. I'm a bit in a noisy place, so don't worry. In fact, I think people do not really understand the vocabulary for tokenomics. It's really new and really difficult to grasp at first sight, at first view, about what everything means, what is included in tokenomics, what is not. So economic security is still like really blurry for everyone in the space, even tokenomists, I think.
That's really good to hear, actually, like in terms of feedback. I think we're overdue for like a glossary of terms, and that's something that Ajay and I have been working on for economic security specifically. So we're about to publish a list of exploits that have happened that have been economic attacks to our GitHub, Tokenomics XYZ, and we're going to include some definitions on like what these terms actually mean. But I'm curious, how would you define economic security, Jules?
No, I cheated because I heard your talk about demand side tokenomics at ECC Barcamp. So I'm biased. I think it's really interesting to see, for example, on Tornado Cash example, saying that because there is no enough value capture, that people are not incentive at every layer to has the right compartment, and I think that's what is really important here, and how we can expand this concept for every aspect and every layer to have alignment, a really incentive alignment for everyone.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that definition of like the alignment of incentives that in the context of economic security prevent a protocol from being collapsed. Of course, in the context of value capture, the second principle of tokenomics, it's the alignment of incentives that cause a token to accrue value. So that's a good. I am glad to hear that definition works as a functional one.
Yes, and it works at different level. Like when we talked about censorship resistance at every layer, this economic security can explain it. I think like that's a good approach to solve censorship resistance at every layer in one single concept. Part.
Yeah, I love that as well about like economic security being a component of censorship resistance. Like I think that's really critical, and that's something I know you and I have both been talking about a lot. And you're working on like formalizing definitions for censorship resistance and permissionlessness and these other qualities. So I think I'm curious to hear, Jules, how you think about how economic security and censorship resistance interact with each other.
Large question. Like first, on DAOs and protocols, you are putting human on chain. You are putting human decision making. So what you want to do is to give some power to human, but not too much, like an interval of power. And align incentives to do the right thing, like economical incentives, are not enough to prevent all kind of behaviors, but it can drive and make a convergent way of alignment. Like your behavior will be driven by these economical align incentives, and you need to have enough economical incentive to behave as you should. So still not defined exactly as I can I think we can go further in the definition still, but it's a good beginning. Having having a vocabulary that is quite precise and really focused. It's necessary to make the ecosystem evolve, because like we are working also on the foundation of the ecosystem with concepts. I mean, behind every word there is a concept. So is the concept validated or invalidated? But we needed to go further.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the definitions are so important because, like, words are tools for thought, and by creating definitions of these things, we're creating the ability for people to think more quickly and more precisely. And one thing that I always think about when describing words, I have like these two influences in how I think about words and language and vocabulary. They're Alan Watts and Jordan Peterson, and they're on completely opposite ends of the spectrum as far like philosophically, where Alan Watts suggests that words are just like arbitrary definitions for things. They don't actually encapsulate reality, and I really resonate with that deeply, and agree that words are necessarily imprecise and impossible to use in order to really explain what reality is. And then Jordan Peterson, who talks about the role of words and language in how he describes is like casting. I think they both actually use this analogy of casting a net over reality to make sense of the chaos, where like the net is made up of these squares, and each square has a particular thing in it. If you were to overlay like a grid over something, then you could describe in those quadrants like what something is there, and you could describe it. So that's kind of how I think about definitions. It's like the closer we can get to a sort of a net that's accurately overlaying something, the more precise we can be in our language, or like the better we can work with those terms. So that's, I don't know, a bit of a philosophical thing, but I definitely think it's important for us to be defining things correctly. And I guess I'm on a bit of a philosophical bent today, but like another thing that I think about is the Tower of Babel, the biblical story of communication breaking down because people couldn't use the same language. I think that's a very powerful metaphor for our society today, with the breakdown and between echo chambers, where people are describing often the same things, but in different ways. And also is powerful for just communication and productivity. It's like you need to be able to speak the same language. And so to that end, we need a central repository of definitions for these things. So I think actually, Jay, this is something we should put on Token Dynamics and then get that going so that everyone's able to use this language and that it's accessible.
Yeah, also, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to add, I completely agree on that point. I think one point I was actually going to raise, sorry, just changing the topic a bit. It was, I think it's about economic security. It was a trade-off between economic security and economic culture. And I think it was just the fact that if you look at it from a demand-side economics standpoint, that trade-off is very apparent.
Jay,
and I think Tara, for example,
Jay, I heard trade-off.
Yes. Sorry, is my line?
I heard trade-off. Maybe you could cover your mic or something like that.
No, I just have my Bluetooth earphones in, but maybe Nate, you could probably talk about this. I was going to talk about the Terra example and economic security and value capture. In that?
Yeah. Definitely, yeah. I think that's a great place to start on like the functional or the examples of economic security trade-offs with value capture in particular. So for the audience, if anyone listening to this is not familiar with economic security, I want to first define it as firstly, one of the principles of tokenomics, where each of the principles of tokenomics have trade-offs with each other. So there's protocol utility, value capture, and economic security. And whenever you have more of one, you will necessarily have more of the other, or less of another, unless you're capturing value creatively is the solution to optimizing for the three principles. But to a degree, there are always going to be trade-offs. There's no free lunch, and this is a trilemma that we're optimizing for. So protocol utility, value capture, economic security. And there is a trade-off between value capture and economic security, and Terra is the perfect example of this, where the way that, so value capture comes from the way that a token is used in a protocol. Tokens used in particular ways will accrue value to themselves, creating what's called a price floor. These price floors are the minimum possible price for a token to trade at based on their use in the protocol. This is the foundation of demand-side tokenomics. We're maximizing demand for a token to be used in the protocol in particular ways that cause it to accrue value, but not so much value that they compromise the security of the protocol. So Terra had a price dependency on Luna. And that was it was actually Anchor had a price dependency on Luna. And this is a little bit of a tangent, but Anchor is an example of a protocol that's built on top of a protocol that can compromise it. So we're seeing this in Ethereum with EigenLayer, just like we saw Anchor protocol compromise Terra. EigenLayer presents a serious risk for Ethereum, even though it's not built into the Ethereum protocol. It's just the implications for how ETH is used in each protocol, and the price dependencies that exist in the ecosystem are very analogous to what happened in Terra. So what happened, so everybody that's listening to this knows the full story of Terra, but the key that I want to highlight is that Luna tokens were used as collateral, and that accrued a lot of value to those Luna tokens. The demand for Luna was proportional to the demand for these UST stablecoins, and there was a lot of that. I know people that had six figures in Luna and in UST, and they were just parking their money there and wanted to have a safe place that was a high volume stablecoin, and of course they were lured in by this attractive 15% APY. One of the red flags that everybody recognizes now is that you can't hard code yield, but so Luna tokens were used to collateralize UST, and so that made the demand for Luna proportional to the demand for UST, and so Luna tokens accrued, were accruing a lot of value as they were bought up on the market to collateralize these stable coins. So collateral is a particularly dangerous mechanism that accrues a lot of value, and so there's less economic security because there's more value capture. So in this way, the Terra is a perfect example of the trade-offs between economic security and value capture. And there are others, but collateralization is one of those mechanisms that has very high tokenomic leverage. And you can read about tokenomic leverage on eatsleepcrypto.com. I put out an article in 2021 or so describing the degree of value capture of a mechanism and how the degree of value capture affects economic security. Tokenomic leverage was initially one of the principles of tokenomics. It was like a proto principle, and I later changed that to economic security. So it was utility, value capture, and tokenomic leverage, but it's actually the trade-offs there fit with the three principles of tokenomics now, which you can read about on tokendynamics.xyz under our resources section. So hopefully that gives enough color and background to the trade-offs between economic security and value capture. And thanks to Ajay for prompting that. I do want this to be more of a discussion, but I've definitely been monologuing a bit. I'm curious, would you add anything to that, Ajay or Jules? And do you see other examples? Like, where do you see other examples of trade-offs between value capture and economic security, or maybe utility and economic security? What do you guys think?
Honestly, I don't have any example that came in mind. I don't know, for example, if you need to give an advice for a new founder that is going to create its own tokenomics for DeFi protocol, what change would you do to include economic security in it?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking that. Yeah, I love that. So as a new protocol founder, especially in DeFi, I think one, like the obvious recommendation that everybody is kind of on board with now is minimize price dependencies. There's still a lot of people actually that are including price dependencies in their protocols. And it's not that price dependencies are necessarily bad. It's that unaligned price dependencies are dangerous for a protocol. And you have to workshop the incentives so that either the parameters of your protocol are wide enough that they tolerate a large degree of variance in the price, or that you're somehow making sure that particular price is going to fall within a certain band. And there's another, there are a couple other mechanisms. There are a couple other ways that you can control for price dependencies, but I won't dig into those here. They're a little more complex, and I'm still workshopping the language around it, but I have identified other mechanisms to do this. But the main one would be like, be wary of where there are price dependencies in your protocol. And if Terra had considered this with Anchor, they might have been able to sound the alarm rather than promoting Anchor protocol and Mirror protocol as places that are paying out insane APYs, and I guess that's a sort of a related issue. But so the first thing I would say is be wary of price dependencies. Second is another mistake Terra made was hard coding yield. Don't hard code yield, even if it's in your own coin.
Yeah, definitely. Like there is one famous example in the real world about that is the lotto. Like when you the lottery. When you're on the lottery, the first lottery that they have fixed prizes, and they have been rugged by people that just calculated the whole combination, and because the price was fixed, they didn't know exactly when to play and what to play. That's why now in the lottery, the price is always variable and not fixed. I think that's
wow,
similar.
That's crazy. Yeah, I didn't know that was a real world analog, but interesting to see that people have been gaming systems like this in TradFi. I thought maybe what you were going to say is like a Ponzi, like the original Ponzi schemes, or like other situations where people have promised a really high rate of return. But yeah, I mean, there's like hard coding yield or hard coding returns is puts you in a dangerous position as a protocol founder, because you there has to be a source of yield. It's like people are realizing this. It's like, oh, we have to look at where the yield comes from. It's not just money that's printed out of thin air. And if it is money that's printed out of thin air, then you have a problem with inflation. So again, going back to the old economics maxim, there is no free lunch.
Yeah, definitely. I had one other issue when I helped a few founders to create tokenomics, is that the amount of knowledge necessary to know what they want to, for example, maximize some output of the token, what the token is here for, was really difficult to grasp, to understand. Like founders didn't have enough knowledge about tokenomics to really know what they want. And that's one thing that we can work on to lower the entry gap for founders to understand what they can maximize, what output they can maximize. How could we do that?
Can you say that last part again? Like, can you rephrase the question maybe?
In my idea was to give enough information to the founder that wants to create a token to see how to design, to architect the token.
Yes.
And
like in general. Yeah.
In general.
Yeah, that's something Nate Suits from Token Engineering Commons and I were going back and forth about yesterday. Excuse me. I found this article from 2001. It was by PwC, and it was on value capture for .coms, like for the original internet companies. And I was reading through it, and I was like, "Holy crap, this is so relevant today!" And it's even more relevant because in crypto, the consequences are more dire from designing something poorly. Like in a traditional business, you have the opportunity to pivot and change course. But in crypto, at least for hyperstructures, which are the ideal crypto protocols, because they're more censorship resistant and likely to last longer, and less likely to be exploited significantly because they don't have like governance and human dependencies and things. So we were talking about this concept of like what needs to be built and what needs to be done for crypto to move forward as an innovation in the world. And the first thing I thought of was, to your point, was a framework for designing cryptocurrency protocols from scratch. And we have this in-house at Tokenomics where we're using it with our clients, and it's a pretty streamlined system. This is the thing that I've been working on for the last 3 years, to be fair, of like starting, in October 2020, I put out a spec for protocol design and modeling token value accrual. And since then, we've been workshopping and putting together a demand side tokenomics framework. And I think that's going to eventually will become something that's more public. But I agree with you that that's what founders need right now they need both. Hey, Nate. Hey, Vesta. Nate, I was just talking about the need that we identified yesterday for an economic security, for a tokenomics framework. I'll invite you guys up on stage in a second to speak. But what we were talking about is how necessary this is to founders. Like, they really need guidance on this. And I think it's because most founders are engineers by heart rather than economists, or engineers at heart and by trade. They're not necessarily economists. And there's two types of I think there's two archetypes in business. There are the people that are creating valuable applications and really maximizing the value created. And then there are the people that are able to monetize. And often those are different. So this is a heuristic I've been thinking about a lot. I call it like Tesla versus Edison. Another example would be like a Bill Gates or a Steve Jobs.
This space was downloaded via spacesdown.com. Visit to download your spaces today.
That are effectively monetizing these inventions. And so it's interesting that all the people in this space are here, because these are things that I talk about with all of you. So today is more of an informal discussion, but I would love for anyone to respond to that. I'll invite everybody who just joined to speak and weigh in and ask questions about tokenomics or economic security.
I don't have any question on it. Like, most of the time, if I were a founder that wanted to create his own token, what would be my obstacles to go through? Today, what do you think they are?
Yeah. So I will give the high level of our framework, and I presented this in Denver as demand side tokenomics. And so what we start with identifying the unique utility that your protocol can provide. So that's like the what your application does well and what it provides users, how it leverages a blockchain. Like the old question, why do you need a blockchain? That should be the first thing that you answer about your application, is like, why does this need to be on chain? Why couldn't you just do this in a centralized database with, governments as arbiters of the application and the transactions or whatever? This, again, going back to it, your unique value proposition is going to touch on, if not be entirely related to, censorship resistance. So first is looking at the utility. Next is looking at how does that utility naturally translate to a value accrual mechanism, or like a tokenomic mechanism that's going to cause your token to become valuable. And there's sort of templates that we've identified at Tokenomics that naturally map to the utility. So there's tokenomic mechanisms that are natural best fits for different types of utility that your protocol might provide, and different types of protocols. And the third point, the third principle of tokenomics, and the third thing for founders to consider in developing a protocol is, are the incentives aligned? Of the ways, of all the mechanisms that you use, are there any edge cases or externalities or anything like that might cause the protocol to collapse, or might lead to inflation because you're subsidizing some user behavior that's not matched to some other demand that's those subsidies are drawing on. And these are the three principles of tokenomics. So we're starting with utility, we're moving to value capture, and then we're QAing all of it with economic security and looking at whether the incentives are aligned. And after that, you can look at supply, allocation, distribution, which are ultimately afterthoughts. Those are not that important in the grand scheme of protocol design. And it's been interesting to see people start to realize that tokenomics is not encapsulated in a pie chart. Tokenomics are much more. Tokenomics is token and economics has supply and demand. So we're here putting out the demand side of tokenomics and popularizing that. I see Nate joined the stage. Nate, good to have you here. Mike in the audience, thanks for joining. Feel free to come up and ask questions or speak, and Vesta as well. Really great to have you guys here. Hope this is landing.
Yeah, thanks for hosting, man. This is really cool. I haven't had a chance to really listen into the AMAs yet, so I'm just gonna be listening and for the moment, and I'll pipe in whenever something hits. So thanks for having me up here.
Awesome. Yeah, glad to have you up here. Looking forward to our future space. Maybe in the next couple of weeks, we'll have one where we talk about censorship resistance and the goal of crypto, and some of the more philosophical things that you and I have really jived on. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, and one of the really interesting aspects to me is like kind of the challenge that you brought forth of like kind of the different dynamics that need to be taken into consideration.
Put a question in the chat.
Hey, sorry, Ajay, can you hold on? I think you might be lagged, but Nate is asking a question.
Sorry to interrupt, AJ. My bad. Yeah, so I was just curious to know, like, the thing, especially for founders who are, considering, are having to consider both the design, the economics, the build, to really encapsulate this entire interdisciplinary approach to tokenomics design. I was curious to know, like, do you think what areas do you think are the most challenging for founders and builders to actually understand and capture?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it goes back to right before you joined, Jules was saying how important it is to define a lot of the terms that we're using, because they're not quite defined yet. So I went on a little philosophical rant about how words are important, and like definitions for things are very important for productivity and cooperation. And so I think initially, like, the first step is just getting everyone on board with the same language. It's why I get so frustrated when people are using different terms for tokenomics, and I'm trying to get everyone to converge on the thing I think is most likely for everyone to eventually converge on, which is the word with the least amount of syllables. So that's tokenomics. and then we're talking about like economic security, how to define that, how to define the principles of tokenomics. And the second thing, I think, like, to answer your question directly about like which aspect of tokenomics is actually the most difficult, I think it's value capture. And I think it's for two reasons. First, and they're sort of intertwined. The builders in this space are not businessmen. Like, they're not like economists, and they don't think like, they're not trying to generate profit or, and that's a great thing. Like, this space comes from open source. And so there are these values that are built in. And I think this is something I'm really looking forward to discussing with you on our Twitter space that we do, is like, crypto is a combination of open source and anarcho-capitalism, like this cypherpunk kind of ethos that, it has anarchist roots, and I think is a little more capitalist in its roots, especially coming from like the Bitcoin side of things. I see anarcho-capitalism as foundational to crypto, but I understand that there's also like anarcho-socialism and different flavors of anarchist thought that are influencing the space. But I think for, initially, or I guess one of the reasons that value capture is so hard for founders is they're not business people, and they're more ideologically driven to create a lot of value and build cool things and build new inventions. And the second reason I think it's difficult for them is like, value capture is just tough. There's no there are not great analogs and for capturing value in these using tokenomic mechanisms. Like, these are almost entirely new things for most people, especially the engineers that we're talking about that are developing protocols. And so I think what's needed is a sort of like an approach to each of those factors, or like a solution to each of those things. The first is like, I think we should be encouraging value capture more, because there is, I think it's very reasonable and fair to expect that people creating a lot of value should be paid. And the second point is, I think there needs to be more education around what value capture is and how to do it. And so that's part of what we're doing at Tokenomics, is like sharing with people how we're capturing value and like what even value capture is, because we're at the very earliest stages where people still need the definitions of things. And so I think that's a solution. I went ahead of myself, but definitely I think the hardest thing for founders is to capture value, and to know that capturing value is okay. Like, as long as you're being transparent about like, hey, we're taking you can do it directly. It's actually not the best way to capture value, because it's not defensible in crypto, but you could charge a 0.25% fee in your protocol for providing a massive service that is subversive and puts you on a lot of lists like Railgun does. And I think that's perfectly legitimate, because people need to be compensated for the enormous risk that they're taking in developing censorship resistant applications. I think that's a perfect alignment of ethics. I see nothing wrong with people getting paid for building these things on an ethical level. And then on a practical level, these things won't get built if people aren't being paid to build them. The talent will flow elsewhere. And right now we've been fortunate enough to have a lot of VC funding, and there's enough room for people to create pure governance tokens that are not valuable and or at least not valuable for the right reasons. But that money will eventually dry up if people don't create actually genuinely valuable tokens. The VCs will lose interest, and because they're profit oriented, they're purely profit oriented, right? Like, VCs are not particularly aligned with the space. So I think this is the hardest thing. Value capture is the hardest thing for founders, and the solution is for us to encourage founders who are creating legitimately valuable applications to capture value, and teaching them how to do that. So that's what we're about at Tokenomics, is walking founders through how to effectively capture value in ways that don't compromise the protocol. Jay, I think you were gonna mention something. Nate, if you want to respond to that, that's cool too.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, it's really funny, especially being in kind of this public goods, where we look at all blockchain systems or any tokenized system as kind of like this digital permanent digital public infrastructure, where almost thinking about revenue or profit is almost it feels like a dirty word or like a dirty concept that we can't get behind. And so I think that you hit the nail on the head in terms of the kind of the ideological roots that we all had at one point. I think almost everybody in this space has some type of ideology that kind of pulled us in to why this technology is important and its application into our everyday lives. And I think that this is something that kind of blinds us from actually, creating these sustainable protocols that actually generate revenue and capture that value. And I think this is a big problem that needs to be addressed. And I completely agree with you. And it's not a very simple solution, but education is a huge part of that.
Yeah, I'm with you, and in that I also have that slight intuition of like that feeling. It's like, oh no, capturing value, like it sounds like a bad thing. It's like capturing, So sometimes I use the word accruing value to a token, because it's not like the value is being siphoned out of the system. Value is not the pie is not a fixed size. Like value is subjective, and it's created in win-win situations to greater degrees. Like just because one person has a lot of value and gets a lot of value out of a transaction doesn't mean someone else loses out. It's actually, in a free market, the only kinds of transactions that occur are those where participants both perceive that they're getting more value. And so the more transactions we have, the more value is being created. And so when we insert money in between, or we create tokens to facilitate that transfer, we're tokenizing. We're putting a measurement to the value that's being created. And so that's one of the, yeah, I hear you on like we're creating these public goods, which I think is another term that needs defining. And maybe I'd be interested to hear your definition of that. But yeah, we're creating these public goods that we want to be, free for everybody to use, or available for everybody to use more precise language there. And so the idea is like, well, like, do we, would you monetize? What would you charge for a public utility? It's kind of like, I think that's maybe like public utilities are kind of the thing that I think about when I hear public goods. And I think when people are thinking by analogy to like existing infrastructure, which are excludable goods, like if one person has the electricity generated by a coal plant, then another person doesn't have it. Or like if one person is using some water that's coming from the center of a city, another person is not getting that water. These are excludable goods. When people are thinking by analogy, I think they're projecting the excludability of goods onto the type of the word public goods in the context of crypto. And so they're thinking, well, we don't want to like monetize this too much, because then people won't be able to use it. They'll be priced out, or different things like that. So that I agree. It's a broad problem. I think education is part of the solution. But I'm curious, Nate, if you wouldn't mind, how do you define public goods? I think this is going to be something we'll talk about in our next space, but I'd love to hear now.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about the excludability and the traditional public good definition. I think that you're right in the sense that I'm guilty of this as well, where I kind of have this analogous mindset of comparing it to something like a public utility. but we fail to realize that a lot of the utilities that we do use in our modern society today also need maintenance. They need to have monitoring systems that actually keep track of it, making sure that it's completely available to the public. And for some reason, I think we have this mindset that when it comes to smart contracts in particular, that once we set it there, and it's existed for a significant amount of time, there's nothing wrong with it, and that we can just set it and forget it. And that way that we don't need to have people to pay them to actually keep up maintenance or to monitor new innovations that may change the status quo or put that at risk. And so I think that kind of gets lobbed into the economic security question. And this is something that I think we really need to pay attention to and really set up the actual structures for people to actually monitor these protocols as they evolve, as they are being used by different types of use cases by different people. Because it is so open, there are different use cases for any type of token or any type of economic system that we decide to create, whatever digital economy that is put forth. And so I think this is a really good topic to explore, is this kind of analogy mindset that we have, and making sure that we have to have value capture in order for it to be sustainable, and we have to have value capture in order to have people monitor and to maintain the system as it is, especially if a lot of people are using it. Because if we don't, that's when big vulnerabilities start to expose themselves, either on the smart contract level or on the social, use case level. And so I think that's a really good point. But yeah, hopefully that answers a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's that. I think economic security. It's funny because economic security, in a traditional sense, refers to the ability of an individual or a household to sustain itself, and I think that's true. Economic security includes the alignment of incentives in a protocol, and it's also sort of includes the self-sustainability of a protocol, which is part of the alignment of incentives. And if a protocol isn't paying out the participants sufficiently enough, especially if those participants are interested in the protocol for financial reasons, then it's not going to survive long term. So we have to build in ways that this is attractive to those profit-oriented people that sustain the system to begin with.
Hello.
Hey, Vesta.
How's
it going?
Good. So I have two topics that I kind of want to throw out, and I'm curious about. One is, what are the tools that people here are using? Because I'm kind of jumping back in, and the only thing I remember is the Common Stack was using like CAD or I think Block Science. Are there any tools, or like what kind of processes or tools are people using? And second one is a little bit different, but with like all the things that are happening, like how do you deal with the fact that they're like the market is changing so much? There are like new protocols, new shapes, and like the whole design space for this stuff is like crazy and cool. Is that kind of part of what you specialize in terms of like staying up to date with what's happening, because that directly impacts like the risks and the opportunities for each protocol or project?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll answer the first question first. Thanks for coming up and asking, by the way. Sorry it took so long to approve you as a speaker. I just saw it when I had to switch to the Tokenomics account. But to answer the first question, we like CAD. Machinations is another tool. Machinations.io is another tool that's a little more. I've always felt like Machinations is like GameFi oriented. CAD is a little more customizable, which can be a pain, but it's also customizable, which is great. It's Python, so very, very extensible, kind of composable. Nate might be able to speak to this more, so I'll ask him for his opinion after this. But the second question, like how do we keep track of everything? This is like kind of a realization that I had a year ago. Crypto and the world in general, but crypto also became so broad that it's impossible to keep up with every sphere. So like I know what's going on in Avalanche to the degree that Luigi DeMeo is tweeting about it, or like, one of my friends in the Avalanche ecosystem is talking about what's going on in Avalanche. And I can keep tabs on Cosmos and Ethereum, and that's about it. And then a couple other like L1s that are loosely in one of those ecosystems, like an EVM clone, or like an IBC compatible blockchain. But yeah, I mean, we spend a lot of time like compiling resources. We've got our own like database of like, for example, what Oracle solutions there are now, or like what we're talking about at the beginning, and we'll publish this soon, is like what economic security exploits have happened. And keeping up with this, it feels more and more like a full-time job, but we love that because this is the most interesting space in the world. So, why wouldn't we love doing all that research? Maybe speaking for myself here, but also I think Ajay resonates with that. And probably everyone in this chat resonates with that. But yeah, the other component of it though is that there's actually not that much that is like new in terms of innovation in crypto. This is like kind of a counterintuitive, maybe heretical position, but people are not creating very many new primitives. Like we saw Uniswap with XY equals K like 5 years ago. I'd say Curve is a 0-to-1 innovation, like VE Tokenomics. Even though I don't like VE Tokenomics for all things at all times, it is probably a 0-to-1 innovation. The bribing model that Curve has is another sort of 0-to-1 crypto tokenomic primitive. We have like Moloch DAO, and the fact that I can like come up with these and just name them speaks to how few there are. So when we're looking at, we're talking about economic security, even the types of economic security exploits are not new. It's not like there's this crazy, like, oh, wow, never thought of that. Like, no, it's like, oh, another Oracle manipulation, another governance liquidation. Like these are, they're actually predictable and standardized. And I wish I could get to these smaller protocols before they happen. But the kinds of things that are happening in tokenomics and in economic security are mostly standard, where they'll start to happen. Like one will happen, like someone liquidates treasury, and then everyone's like, oh, I can liquidate treasuries because they're all designed the same way. So it's on the one hand, like, yes, there's a lot to keep track of. On the other hand, there's not that much variation between the types of attacks and the types of tokenomic mechanisms that people are using. So I would say the mechanism design space is seriously lagging behind the demand for new primitives in tokenomics, and that's one of the things that we're big on is mechanism design. So we've been creating some unique mechanisms for our clients, and we're looking forward to some of those becoming public in the next 6 months or so, where we've created a couple things that I think are going to catch on and be hopefully the next Moloch DAO or the next Curve or whatever it is. So yeah, there's a lot of innovation, but also at the same time, there's not that much. And Nate, I'd mentioned, sorry, Vesta, if you want to respond to that. And then after that, Nate, if you want to share what tools you're using and finding useful, that would be great.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you. That was great. That's super helpful.
Yeah, in terms of tooling, I think modeling is really, really foundational for future designs of token economic systems, because I think that, if you're not doing modeling and have multiple models for the economic system you provide in the future, I think that you're going to be at a loss. The space is only getting more complex and more adversarial. And as time goes on, these modeling tools are going to be huge. I know you mentioned CAD and Machinations, and if you're just a beginner, Machinations is a great place to start, just because it is as Nate mentioned, that it's kind of focused on kind of the gaming aspect of it, but it allows you to have a good understanding of the the framework or the design of your token economic system, and you can map it out and play around with the different parameters of what you're proposing and the design of the system that you're proposing. CAD/CAD is a little bit more complex, as Nate said, is Python based, but it is a great agent based modeling system, and the things that you can do there are pretty substantial in terms of understanding the risks that you might have. It allows for kind of these broad parameter sweeps and allows you to kind of get into the nitty gritty of what types of fundamental economic risks may exist in the future of your token economic system. And then another tool is Token Spice. This is largely developed by Trent McConaughey over at Ocean Protocol. And it's very similar to CAD/CAD, but it allows you to input smart contract logic. So you can actually put in your smart contract logic and kind of do some parameter sweeps and plug those smart contracts in and just see exactly what type of risks that may exist outside of just simple bugs. It could be from different token distributions and other social risks that might occur. So those are the big three right now, and I would like to see more infrastructure built around these modeling tools and more frameworks and libraries that allow people to kind of explore existing models and ones that didn't work in particular.
Yeah, that's definitely the more infrastructure being built around is like I've heard that voice a lot recently. I think Blockboy from Bankless DAO and Bankless Consulting was talking about this a couple days ago and tagged a bunch of us. And I was like, I don't really know what plugins people are using for CAD/CAD. I think that would be great to have those kinds of composable pieces to put in. And Token Spice is interesting. I actually haven't checked that out yet, but that's now on the list. So yeah, I think we're coming up on the hour, and I want to wrap this up. We had one more question. Ajay asked, what economic security risks have you seen that are unique to privacy and or infrastructure projects? Thank you for the underhand, Ajay. Our target market at Tokenomics is infrastructure and privacy preserving projects. So I'd say the main one here, it's going to tie it to our core theme, is censorship resistance. I think what a lot of infrastructure projects overlook, like broadly, is the need for like no dependencies, to have no external dependencies. This is another economic security point. As you want to minimize external dependencies, whether those are oracles or humans that are voting on things, upgrading the protocol. Recently, I've been talking about the need for ungovernance or non-governance. Might come up with a different word to distinguish this from Amin Soleimani's ungovernance, because I think we need a complete lack of governance, but we also need flexibility hard-coded into the protocol. So I'd say like minimizing external dependencies is something that infrastructures tend to overlook, where they're adding a DAO governed multi-sig or some other voting mechanism to their protocol that ultimately weakens it. And I'll go into that another day. And then for privacy protocols, I think the most frequently overlooked economic security consideration related to censorship resistance as well is that privacy needs to be available at every layer of a stack. Economic security is inherited. So the economic security of the protocols that you build on are part of the economic security of your protocol. So if Ethereum has MEV or doesn't have privacy, then some aspects of your protocol are going to be subject to MEV or not have privacy. And we saw this with Tornado Cash is the best example, where the amount of people that were and the volume of funds that are going to Tornado Cash now after it's been sanctioned by OFAC is significantly less. I think it's on the order of it's an order of magnitude less volume that's going into Tornado Cash now. Would have to double check that for the latest stats. But point there is that Tornado Cash had privacy for some groups of users, but it didn't have privacy for validators because Ethereum doesn't have privacy for validators. And while relayers are sufficiently incentivized to continue providing the service, other groups of users are not, because of the a lack of privacy in the protocol at every layer of the stack. So that's a specific consideration specific to privacy protocols, and these are the kinds of things that we help our clients think through. And so if there's anyone listening to the space that's working on a privacy preserving protocol or an infrastructure protocol or a combination of both, we would love to help you out with this and help you think through the considerations by providing these kinds of mental models that are going to help you address all of the various incentives of the participants of your protocol. So with that, I will wrap it up. We're at 12 noon in Colombia right now, where I'm currently based, and want to give everyone the rest of the day free. Hopefully you've all enjoyed this space. I really appreciate everybody joining and participating. Thank you all for coming and for sharing all of your insights. I'm really looking forward to doing this again. We're going to be doing this every week, Twitter space at the same time, and I'm looking forward to bringing more of you on. And Nate, we had mentioned that we'd like to do a space together, so that might be upcoming in the next few. So thank you guys so much for all the questions and for joining and listening in. I'll catch you all later. Have a good one.
Thanks, Nate.
Bye. Thank you.
This space was downloaded via spacesdown.com. Visit to download your spaces today.